Fresh air.
Hello and welcome to Fresh Ears, the podcast where we explore the world of podcasting from the perspective of brands and businesses. I'm Michaela Hallam, the Director of Content.
And I'm Neil Cowling, the founder of Fresh Air, the UK's leading podcast company for brands.
Which I'll let you say this week.
There is no arguing about that. That's what we are. So this is the second episode of the revamped Fresh Ears, and today we're going to be in conversation with Steve Pratt, discussing the power that brands hold in becoming their own media companies. Plus, we'll continue to make sure you're up to date with the latest happenings in the world of podcasting and audio, whether that be a stat or something we've just seen and we like.
And we will have our podcast recommend, our top pick of the podcasts you should be listening to and why. Those are podcast recommendations that come from colleagues or industry professionals. And today we're quite excited about the fact that this week's recommendation comes from the actual Steve Pratt himself.
So, talking of Steve, let's speak to the man himself. Anyone who knows anything about Pacific Content and Fresh Air can join the line between the two. Pacific Content for a long time were the leaders in North America of branded podcasts, and I am not ashamed to say that Fresh Air was very much based on the company that Steve founded. He now has a new book called Earn It, Unconventional Strategies for Brave Marketers, and we're chuffed that he's joining us from his home in Canada right now. Hi, Steve.
Welcome, Steve.
That's great to see you both. Neil, I know we've talked about this before, but when you first reached out when I was at Pacific Content, it was just like kindred spirits where you and I both thought and believed exactly the same thing. So it's nice to be here talking about all this stuff again. And I always like talking to people who share the same values and beliefs about what's possible in this space.
Yeah, I like to think myself as a bit of a Steve Pratt clone, essentially, with an English
kindred
accent.
Spirit. It's a
kindred spirit. That's the
one.
I don't think I can.
Let's stick with that. Tell us a little bit, for the audience who don't know about Pacific and about yourself. Tell us a bit about your origin story.
Much like yourself, I came from a media background. I worked in music television and music radio at Canada's public broadcaster for quite a while, running an innovation lab at the CBC. And one of the things that we did very early on was we started a legal music podcast in 2005.
Wow, that's
and I got
early.
hooked on podcasting. Yeah, it was really, we were listening to this thing called the Daily Source Code from Adam Curry, which is, one of the first podcasts or the first podcast ever. And we're like, oh, this would be an interesting thing to put in our lab. And we had a website that was kind of like MySpace, where all these artists owned their own rights and were uploading music. And we made a waiver and said, hey, if you want to try this thing called a podcast, we're not going to make any revenue on it, and we'll put it out and help promote your music as an experiment. And a bunch of them did it, and it turned into something where we were getting, in the first year, like 80,000 downloads an episode or something.
This
like
is
that,
almost
people all over the
the
world.
kind of inaugural moment of doing the opposite, which we'll come to, isn't it? In terms of the world's worst radio station turned into what was definitively then called the world's best.
Yes, yeah, it was leaning into what are the things that where the conventional wisdom of broadcasting does not make sense in the digital era, or what are the things that we can rethink from zero because of the global power of the internet. And aggregating small audiences all over the world turns into a very large audience, which is an unexpected lab success, I guess, with early podcasting. So anyways, I got the podcasting bug early, and at some point I left the CBC and saw this trend of companies like Red Bull and others starting to act more like media companies, and believed that was the future, where they could just bypass media companies and advertising and build their own audiences. And Pacific Content came out of kind of a merging of that belief with the power of podcasting, where we were like, let's see if any brands would like to make podcasts and build their own audiences and make real shows. And that was kind of the origin story of Pacific Content.
And who was the first brand to say yes?
We got so lucky, honestly. There were so many wonderful strokes of luck in this, but Slack was our first client, and they were, on the start of their rocket ship growth, but still fairly early. And they had a really, really amazing progressive marketing team led by their CMO, a guy named Bill Masitis. And we had 2 meetings with them and they said, yeah, let's give this thing a try. And we're like, oh, wow, I guess we have to actually figure out how to budget this and make it and distribute it and do all these sorts of things. And I use this term creative bravery a lot for, are you going to make a real show? And are you going to make something that doesn't feel or sound like marketing? And our first client from day one was so creatively brave about making something that just felt like a real fun show to listen to that happened to come from Slack. I think that really set the course for everything else.
Oh, that's the other thing that you say. You say creative bravery and commitment. And that's about then you make this show, but then people need to know that it exists in the first place. So making sure that not only do you make great content, but you distribute it in a way that the potential audience is going to hear about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a weird mindset, but you actually need, when you're making branded content, you need to market your marketing. And I think that's a part that a lot of people assume that you just put it out and it'll find an audience, even if it's great. And it doesn't really work like that. We learned that lesson the hard way. Slack got a very big audience out of the gate because it was odd, and it was like, kind of one of the first shows to do something like this. I remember there was a really awesome headline, and I think it was Forbes or something like that said, Slack is making a podcast, for some reason. And we were just like, this is the best. This is Brilliant. The best. It just flagging it as like, this is a really strange thing. Why are they doing this? And that brought a lot of curiosity to come in and listen to it. But then as we started making more shows, we realized that really good shows, where you could see that people were listening to the shows, but didn't have a huge number of people, we actually needed a marketing plan and to help companies think and act more like media companies in terms of building audiences for shows. And I tracked a woman named Rachel Hammerman down. She was the person who did all the marketing and communications for the first season of Serial, which is this just massive pop culture game changer podcast that kind of inspired our move into podcasting. And we hired her to come up and work with us and develop an audience development strategy for our clients. And we brought her into some of our early strategy sessions with other clients. And that made a huge difference for us as well. Like this idea of like, are you going to commit to doing it? And are you going to unlock some of the superpowers that brands have to reach a lot of people, but promote a show instead of talk about your products and services? And then we ended up building out a whole audience development department that Dan Meisner, who's now at Bumper, led all of that. And man, he's just so smart and figured out so many brilliant things to do in that audience development space. I think when you have a fabulous show and you market it really, really well, you win. That is very basic. If you can just do those two things, you win.
Dan's someone else that we steal so much stuff from in terms of, or are inspired by so much from his work on audience development. Let's rewind then a little bit and talk about the premise of the book of Earn It. We talk a lot about attention.
When you think about just supply and demand, there's so little attention, relatively speaking, compared to how many things are trying to get your attention. And I just feel like our filters have never been stronger for shielding us from things that we don't want and things that annoy us. The tools that are there that help us avoid the things that we don't want, and whether those are ad blockers or the ability to skip ads whenever we don't want them. I think our taste has gotten better, where we don't suffer through mediocrity or boring stuff because there's so much stuff to choose from. It's just like the bar keeps getting higher and higher and higher for what is actually going to be a good use of my time and attention. And I hate to say it, but like, I think while there's a lot of wonderful stuff about AI, I think it's just going to continue to put out more mediocre stuff that's going to make it even harder to figure out, is this thing worth my time and attention? And so the book is really a call to action to say, like, set a higher bar and make stuff that's awesome, that is worth people's time and attention, where at the end of it, if you ask them, was this time well spent? They would say, absolutely. And if I had to do it again, I would listen to this podcast again or watch this video again, because it was a really good use of my time. Again, this is not rocket science, but it feels like not enough people are doing this. And there's this, a lot of the status quo is around putting out as much as possible and putting out stuff that is really fairly conventional and average. And it doesn't work anymore. And if you don't actually have people spending time and attention with the things that you're making, what's the point? There's no one there consuming any of it. It's a waste of everyone's time and money.
You're saying that you want people to come away from this content having made a choice to consume it and then to say that that was time well spent. The title of the book is Unconventional Strategies for Brave Marketers. So what does being creatively brave mean to you? How do you get to that point where somebody's going to make a choice to spend their time with you?
Well, there's a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, I think one, is to know your audience, and to know the people that you're trying to connect with and trying to build relationships with, and to do some research around what's out there and who's already serving them, and what are the needs that are being covered by other people, and how good is that stuff, so that you can think about when we're designing something to put out there, is this going to be a net additive, positive thing in their life? Is this going to actually create real value for them? And to me, that's a creatively brave thing to say, we're going to do something different that doesn't exist, that's going to create massive value. And can we design it in some way as a gift for them from us? That's also a really creatively brave thing to think about, is, how can we make something that is from us, but not about us, and something that is a generous gift and creation of value for other people? That earns attention. If you earn attention by creating value for other people, your brand wins over and over again. It's like this surprising piece of like, oh, they're not actually trying to sell me something, or they're not actually, thinly veiling, brand messages throughout all of it. Are you making a real show that could have come from any other source, an independent creator or a media company or something like that? To me, that's the bar. And the way that you actually can design those things, there's a lot of them, whether it is, knowing who you are and what the unique expertise you have is that would be valued by others, and figuring out a creative, clever way to help share that information with people, or whether it's just making just basic things like making a different kind of show with a format choice or a tone or a voice or something like that. But I think the headline on all of it is, no one wants boring, and no one wants generic, and no one wants like the second, third, fourth, fifth best show in a category. Stand out and be awesome and make something that you're proud of and that audiences are going to enjoy spending their time with.
And who's doing that well, do you think?
You know what? I honestly, I'm going to use some non-podcast examples because I love them, and they're just, and then I don't have to talk about about myself. But people know, like, I feel dumb saying this, but like, I enjoy sometimes base humor. I don't know if you have.
We all do.
I know
We
somebody
do.
else who does that too.
Of course we do, Steve.
See, kindred spirits.
Yeah, exactly.
One of my favorite things is this bathroom spray called Poo-Pourri. And I don't know whether you have it in the UK or not.
We've got that.
We have poo drops.
We've got that in our office bathroom, in fact.
Yeah, well, so this is how honest. I'm oversharing. So we have a lot of bathroom humor. We had a lot of bathroom humor at Pacific Content, and in our office, we had this bathroom spray also, and that's where I discovered Poo-Pourri, because my co-founder Jenny would stock the office with these things. But we actually named our bathrooms after podcasts, and one of them was called S-Town, and the other one was called Dirty John. So that's
Nice.
So
Brilliant.
If you're podcast fans, you'll know that anyways, I saw this spray, and you read the copy on it and you read the product names, you're like, this is hilarious. Like, I can't believe that this company, I can't think of a less sexy product to talk about than something that masks the smell of excrement. And yet it's delightful. Like, I would spend all sorts of time reading these packages and telling other people about it, to the point where I get gifts of bathroom spray from people because I talk about it so much, and not for other reasons. Okay, that's the only reason.
Let's be clear.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll let you off, Steve. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think about, like, do you have a voice that really stands out, and are you doing some things that people will actually pay attention to and tell other people about because it's so clever and creative? If a bathroom spray can do it, like if I'm voluntarily marketing a bathroom spray, I think you've hit some nice creative bravery. And when companies say like, oh, we're not that interesting, I don't know, we're not that creatively brave, Yeah, if a bathroom spray can do it, like I've talked about Oatly, the milk company, that they very similar, just brilliant creative stuff. If an oat milk company and a bathroom spray can do it, your company can probably do it also. It's just, are you
But
brave
it's about
enough?
knowing and knowing who you are and what your tone of voice is, and then telling the story. It's about storytelling, ultimately.
Yeah, what are your values? What's your voice? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? And how do you tell stories through those lenses? When it comes from you, it's going to be a story that other people can't tell.
On that, because we use a phrase, what's the podcast that only you could
can
make, when we talk to brands.
Love it. I love that.
As I said it, I thought, did I steal that from Steve? Did we think that of ourselves? I can't remember. But quite possibly I stole it from you. Anyway, the audio, obviously we're biased towards audio. We're biased towards podcasts. We're all kind of audio nerds. But why do you think that, given everything you've said, creating a gift for the listener, why is audio so strong in that?
For me, audio is a time and attention medium. Like, the power of audio is when you do it well, you get people really, really engaged in imagining things in their head, especially when you're telling great stories, as you're talking about, Michaela. Like, people get very engaged and are willing to spend a lot of time with you relative to other media formats. And I think sometimes there's a confusion around what the right measurements are. Reach is often something that comes from the advertising world and from other platforms. Like television is a reach medium, or like YouTube or TikTok might be a reach medium. I don't think podcast is a reach medium in the same way. And I think I'm probably pirating something from Dan Meisner's at this point.
Okay.
But to me, podcasting is a time and attention medium where if you do it well, the reward is in just an enormous amount of time. And I think about, this is a really dumb example, but it kind of brings it to life. If like an insurance company came to your door and said, hey, we'd like to come and hang out with you in your living room and with your family every 2 weeks for half an hour, like, you'd be like, no, that sounds horrible. Like, that is I would actively avoid that. No matter. And yet, if you make a really good podcast, you can get like a half hour over and over and over again of really full engagement in a way that you can't do in any other medium. And I think, for me, the win of earning time and attention is that that's actually how you build trust with people, and trust becomes relationships, and relationships become customers. I remember going back to Slack, the CMO, Bill Masitis, that I was talking about earlier. He would talk about how they knew that they needed to have a certain number of just phenomenal brand touch points before somebody would start a team or become a customer. And I think it was something somewhere between 12 and 20 touch points with Slack. And content can kind of put that stuff on a schedule where you can blow people's minds with something that is surprisingly wonderful and not a heavy marketing message. We're like, oh, that Slack company makes a really great podcast. It's so wonderfully surprising that it is not an ad, or I'm learning lots of stuff, or hearing cool stories, or expanding my vision about the future of work. To me, the amount of time and the regular nature of a podcast is just such a smart way to build relationships with people in a generous way.
We talked a little bit earlier about the concept of doing the opposite. And it feels like what you've just said about Slack and about, I didn't expect that from their company to create content like that. Can you expand a little bit more on the idea of doing the opposite? What do you mean by that?
It's a bit of my thing. Like, I love doing things differently, because I think if you do everything the same, you blend in with the crowd. And, for me, it has always been creatively interesting to do things that are different because they stand out. And I was really lucky in this book. I reached out to some of my favorite authors of some of the books that have helped me think differently about things to get them in the book, and they said yes. So I have, Dan Heath and his brother wrote this book called Made to Stick, which is about what makes ideas sticky. Jonah Berger wrote a book called Contagious about why ideas spread. Anne Handley is this brilliant content marketer who just has a massive email newsletter where people just feel like they know her and are connected to her. I talked with all of them about this. And one of the biggest things is, being surprising and being unexpected and breaking patterns or violating expectations. Anything in those kind of themes are the things that make you pick up and pay attention to something. Whereas if you know how everything is going to play out, or it's just, again, just very straightforward and predictable, we kind of fade into the background because we know how it's going to end. And I think psychologically, it's really interesting. Our brains look for patterns, and when they, it's almost like this weird future facing survival thing. Like if I run into this in the future, do I know what to do? And if something breaks a pattern or violates an expectation or doesn't go the way we think it is, we really pay attention and like, okay, well, I should pay attention and figure out how this resolves itself in case it's useful to me in the future. So I don't know, that's one big part of doing the opposite for me is if you're not doing something differently, you're going to blend in rather than stand out.
But that ties back in, doesn't it, with being creatively brave? Because a lot of brands want to talk to everyone. But you're not going to always please everybody. So trying to do something that pleases everybody isn't necessarily going to become something that people get passionate about and want to choose to spend time with. So you want to be creatively brave and potentially do something that isn't going to please everybody, but create something that people love as well as potentially hate.
Yeah, and this is another do the opposite thing, is to reach fewer people rather than more people. I'm a huge fan of niches or niches, depending on where you live and how you say
niches,
it.
Yeah, we'll go with it,
yeah. But targeting smaller groups of people who are underserved and making something phenomenal for them that no one else has made yet, you end up with a really passionate, loyal group of people who are greatly appreciative of the fact that you made the best thing on the planet just for them. I had an experience doing that with this music service where we made the podcast at CBC Radio 3 in Canada. And it was a music service. I think off the you said off the top of my head, it was called the world's worst music station by me early on, because we did nothing properly. Like we had multiple genres of music where you could hear in an hour of music, you could hear rock, pop, hip hop, electronic music, country, heavy metal, punk.
And these were all Canadian artists,
all
right?
Independent Canadian artists, all new music, most of them not household names, only on the internet, no broadcast anywhere. And by all the rules, that should not do well. People do not like a wall-to-wall new music, and people do not like massive mixed genres. And it did very, very well because there is a very concentrated group of people who love new music and love, kind of like they're like pan genre music lovers. And we made something that didn't exist for them, and people all over the planet suddenly got interested in new Canadian music. Because it was really good music. Don't get me wrong, it was phenomenal music, and the artists are the ones who earned all the attention. But making something really unconventional like that, it found a pocket of people that were not being served and made the best thing on the planet for them. And it turned into this amazing, amazing community of people that hung out together. They would gather on our website and talk to each other all day. They would listen to the show and interact with the hosts. They would go to festivals and concerts together. One couple got married from after meeting on our blog, which is super amazing. And there's still an active Facebook community, and it hasn't been around for like a decade. Even in the branded space, targeting smaller groups and super serving them has been really, really effective. Red Hat's done a brilliant job doing that with open source enthusiasts and making, we made the show called Command Line Heroes with Red Hat, and I did not think it was going to be that big a success. It was massive. And it was the same thing as Radio 3. They made a phenomenal show for a group of people that were not being super served at that level before.
What's your view of how this is progressing? Do you think storytelling, do you think branded content is getting better? Do you think we're in a sort of golden age of it? Do you think there's a long way to go?
I think there's a wide spectrum right now where the best people are making the best stuff that's ever come out from brands and are showing the most bravery of anybody, and they're reaping a disproportionate amount of the rewards for doing that. And I think there is still a huge glut of people who think churning out mediocrity and talking about yourself and being a thought leader and talking about your own products and services and your own customers, there's regrettably an enormous amount of that still, but I also don't think anybody's paying attention to it. I think that is what people are ignoring and getting the ick from. And to me, the path forward, if people actually look at the metrics of, are people spending time with you, and is it time well spent after they've consumed it? The only path forward is to make better stuff. The only path forward is to actually earn the attention. And so, I believe in it, and I feel like it's inevitable that more people are going to start embracing this idea and making better stuff.
I think we ought to introduce a new measurement there. Does it give people the ick? I like that very much.
Yeah. I've thought about writing a post about like the ick in marketing, but it would be a novel, I think. Yeah.
Steve, thank you very much indeed. The book is called Earn It, Unconventional Strategies for Brave Marketers. Steve Pratt, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks. So much fun to talk to you both.
Before we go, it's time to tell you about anything else that we've noticed going on in the audio world.
Notebook LM. Now, I've mentioned this in the newsletter, but think of what ChatGPT does of giving you a great load of text and then turn that into a podcast. And this is the feature that Notebook LM, which is just another AI website, has created. You can basically put anything in, give it a link, give it a website, and Bob's your uncle, you've suddenly got a whole podcast of people talking about the thing that you've given it to talk about. I use as my example Michaela Hallam's LinkedIn profile. Here we go. This is two completely fake voices who've analysed your LinkedIn profile.
You're going to play a clip, aren't you?
I am.
It was kind of ahead of the curve.
No, totally. Like, she hopped on that sound wave just as it was about to, crest. Podcasts were blowing up. Everyone wanted their own sonic identity, and there she was, ready to ride that wave.
Oh,
You wrote it.
Get the buzzer.
Anyway, that's what you can do. The use I see when we talk about the strength of audio, it's about that kind of subconscious listening, people speaking into your head, and even if you don't think you've absorbed the topic, you have. And that's why I reckon if I was doing my GCSEs again, I might well put it into Notebook LM and listen to it as I went to bed.
Yeah, okay. I probably wouldn't go to sleep listening to that.
To your own LinkedIn profile being analysed? No,
Yeah,
maybe not.
No, thank you. I've got one quick thing that I wanted to mention. I recently went to the cinema to see a National Theatre screening of Prima Facie, which is the one-woman play that stars Jodie Comer. It's incredible that the thing that really struck me from an audio perspective was the score. It's written by Self-Esteem, and it is almost, I'd call it choreographed almost. The way that the music worked with the play is absolutely exceptional. And if you want to be transported through music, then I would highly recommend seeing that.
A couple of bits of fresh air news. The thing that has been out this last fortnight and that we are chuffed to bits about is from L'Oreal. It's called This Is Not a Beauty Podcast. It's created by Fresh Air in partnership with our brilliant clients at T-Brand, the international arm of the New York Times advertising, and we're chuffed to bits with it, aren't we?
Really pleased with it. And again, it does that thing that Steve was talking about coming at the theme from an unexpected angle and doing the opposite. It's called This Is Not a Beauty Podcast, but it actually looks at the role that beauty plays in everything from politics to tech to science to business, and turns that whole concept on its head.
And then the other thing is Stopping to Notice, which is, it's not really a birthday, but it is 200.
It is. Its 200th episode is being celebrated. It comes out next week. And to honour its birthday, we're doing a listener contribution episode where our community of listeners have very generously contributed their own observations on the world around them.
It's a beautiful, beautiful podcast that came out of Ollie's head, basically. One of our producers just heard Miranda Keeling making beautiful observations of the world and decided to turn it into a podcast, and it's now 200 episodes old. Right, now it's time for the podcast recommendation. You've heard him already, and he's back. This time it comes from Steve Pratt.
I'm Steve Pratt, the author of Earn It, Unconventional Strategies for Brave Marketers, and my podcast pick is Shell Game. It's an amazing podcast, shellgame.co. It is a tech journalist named Evan Ratliff who has made an AI clone of himself and his voice, and he sends it out into the world to do increasingly complex tasks on his behalf to test out the state of AI. So it could be telemarketing calls, it could be customer service. He even sends it to like AI therapy on his behalf. It's a fabulous, entertaining show that's very clever and full of laughs about kind of where the state of AI is. but it's also a really important show about thinking about what identity is and what we can and can't believe on the internet and what it means for all of us going forward. Shellgame.co, 2 big thumbs up from Steve Pratt.
And that's just about it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Check us out on our new site, brand new, shiny site, freshair.audio, where you can put faces to our voices, if you so wish, meet the team, have a nosy around, or find out how to get started with your very own podcast.
Plus, when you're there, you can sign up to the best newsletter in the whole world and also give some validation to the fact that it takes me most of my Thursday afternoons to write. It's called Fresh Air Recommends, and it will be in your inbox 9 a.m. every Friday. For now, that was Fresh Ears. Thank you very much for listening.
Fresh air.